Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Indre Viskontas. I'm the Director of Communications for the Sound Health Network. I'm delighted to be here and to share all of this information and heart and soul with all of you, so thank you. This afternoon's panel is on mental health and our youth and how music can play a role. And we have a really exciting, distinguished set of panelists. So I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly. And then we'll talk a little bit about what each of them have experienced and the work that they do. So first, here to my left is Deanna Hanson-Abromeit. She's an associate professor at the University of Kansas. She's a board-certified music therapist. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her work on infants and their caregivers and what role music can play in that relationship. Next to her is Assal Habibi. She's an assistant professor, research professor at the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California, and she conducts longitudinal studies of the impact that music can have on child development. And next to her is Natalie Generally Kirk, who is a board-certified music therapist. She has both a private practice and extensive experience in schools as a music therapist at the middle and high school level. In her private practice, she's the founder of a private practice named Small Steps. And next to her is Jasmine Thomas, who is a senior music business major, or is it business of music major? Music business major, and a minor in jazz performance at Howard University. Yeah, Jeff, one of the producers, and I were joking how we should say that, this day is in part presented by Howard University. They've been such an awesome force here. Thank you for all the participation that you've done yesterday and today. We are so grateful. So you might have noticed a bit of a theme. We're starting with the early stages of human development and moving out into what is the exit point of our youth on this panel. And so I just want to, start out by, Deanna, tell us a little bit about your work, and in particular, the kinds of infants that you work with.
So I work a lot with babies who are born prematurely. And so in those babies, we're really looking at their sensory system organization. So when you're born early, your sensory system, so your ability to take in information from the environment and organize it, is limited because you just haven't had enough time to develop neurologically yet. So some of what we do through music-based interventions is to help organize that sensory information. In addition, we're starting a new project with babies who have been exposed to opioids during pregnancy, and they show a lot of withdrawal symptoms, which tend to be very agitated states, difficulty sleeping and consoling, and so we're exploring, kind of really looking at the components, the subcomponents of music that were kind of talked about a little bit in our NIH panel earlier, specifically rhythm and melodic contour, and we're looking at using aspects of scat and swing to kind of interfere with those withdrawal symptoms and redirect kind of that behavior. So part of my work is to really look at the components of music and how and why they can make an effect in helping those babies organize their sensory environment and redirect those attentions to help calm that nervous system response.
So I will say we did have a baby lined up, but she got cranky and had to go take a nap, I think, which we can all relate. So in the absence of said baby, can you tell us a little bit about, the work that you do also has implications for the child's entire life. And we talked previously about how the infant is a kind of blank slate when it comes to mental health. So tell us a little more about that.
So one of the things that we're really looking at is how our nervous system responds to sensory environment and the ways in which we're kind of setting a foundation in infancy to that ability to manage and cope with sensory experiences that can make us feel more or less stressed. And so part of that work is also thinking about the ways in which we can use music experiences to co-regulate between the therapist and the baby or the parent and the baby, or the nurse and the baby, any of those caregivers that are involved, and how we can use music to help with that co-regulation. And we're really approaching it from this idea of amodal properties, which looks at the way we synchronize things like rhythm and tempo and organize it in a synchronized way so that in these really young nervous system responses, they are taking that in more as a single sensory experience rather than a multi-sensory experience. And so that coordination and synchronization is really important to their ability to manage multiple sensory experiences.
One of the things I was really surprised by when I first had a kid and I had a baby that I hadn't really spent any time with babies was just how twitchy the child was, and how like the nervous system was so disorganized. There's like a hand going there, and you have to like strap them down, otherwise they wake themselves up. And can you talk a little bit about sort of we know music has a role in coordination. That does seem to be one of the main features of either music training or when we make music together. We not only coordinate our own bodies, but we coordinate with everyone around us. So in some ways, music is kind of a super stimulus.
Right. So this idea of beat synchronization, so Laurel Trainer and her colleagues in Canada have really looked at this beautiful study where a baby was being held facing out to another individual, and they were moving either in rhythm that was synchronized or off beat with the person that they were watching. And they saw, these were older infants than I work with, but they saw that these babies were developing a sense of empathy. And so this idea of regulation in terms of interactions with adult caregivers and others is really important to kind of setting that foundation for healthy relationships. And what we're learning is that music can have a really strong role in that because we can nuance the components of the music in response to the behavior that we're getting. So with these babies who have been exposed to opioids, one of the characteristics is a lot of twitching, and what we're seeing in the clinical environment is that if we start that singing in a way that's watching for those twitches and beginning, we can kind of navigate around them and help them kind of calm down so that they're more able to eat and go to sleep and try to sustain that.
And that really dovetails well with some of the work we heard about just earlier on how music can help people who are going through painful, and opioid withdrawal is very painful. People don't recognize that the pain element there can help you kind of regulate that pain and work through it.
Right. And one of the hopes is that then we're also going to help with, work with moms and to that co-regulation piece, that then perhaps this idea of singing in a synchronized and rhythmic way, and looking at some of the other music elements I think that they were talking about here too, is that we can kind of build that relationship of attunement between a parent and a child really, really early on that then can help navigate through the lifespan and hopefully setting a foundation for healthy mental and relational experiences.
One of my other favorite studies by Laurel Trainer, whom you mentioned, is related to these young babies who were given 6 months of participatory music making classes, where they were participating in the music making from 6 months old to 12 months, and it turns out that the kids that were in the participatory section rather than just the listening section ended up being much better able to recognize gestures and other kind of expressions of emotion. And so I wonder if we talk a little bit about Assal, your work moving forward from that, what impact musical training has on general child development in the next sphere. So the work that you do is longitudinal, which is not easy to do and hard. So tell us a little bit about what is a longitudinal study. What does that mean?
Yeah, so longitudinal meaning that we are tracking these children as they go through their development and their music training program. So we enrolled them when they were 6 years old. They have just began school, elementary school. They were enrolled into their program, so it was not that we randomly assigned them to their program. They have already selected the music program, which is the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles. It's a music education program that is provided by the LA Philharmonic. But not necessarily, they didn't have to come from privileged backgrounds. This program is free access that is offered to them. It's a very high quality program, 3 to 4 times a week. They go after school, 2 hours after school, and all the music education is done in a group. So an emphasis of social interaction and being in a group and everybody helping each other, so for the ensemble to sound well, not necessarily one person to become a star of the ensemble. We also had control groups, because when you're looking at children longitudinally, everybody gets better with reading, with math, with cognitive ability. So we had a group of children who are participants in a sports program, a soccer program that was also community setting. It was free access. And then a set of children who were not necessarily participating in systematic sports or music. Basically, they were just going to school. We did not stop anybody from participating in an enrichment program. We just tracked them very meticulously every month to see if they have signed up for any program that reached the significance and frequency of the other two programs. It's hard to do longitudinal work, especially
Can
with
we just
children.
pause for a second? Can we roll the first video? I just want the audience to get to see what this program is like. Here's a video of week 1 in this program.
I want to play the tuba because I know that it makes a low noise and it's kind of a little loud. I would like to play the violin. I like to play the French horn because the French horn looks spirally and I think it would make a pretty good noise.
I want to play the French horn because I like the way it sounds.
So you can see that they don't have any experience with these instruments. They're using paper violins to learn, in a song. But what a brilliant program. I mean, you feel the love in the room.
Yeah.
You feel like, I want to be in that classroom.
There's a lot of chaos. When they first got their violins and I walked in the room, everybody was fighting with the bows. Like it was just this giant mess. But the program is really, what is unique about it is that it creates community. These parents often don't have a car, so they have to take public transportation. They have to kind of take time out of a very busy life to bring their children to this program. But they have about 86% retention rate year by year, because it's a place for them to feel belong to. They did a lot of good work in keeping the family, so the mothers got to have a book club when they dropped the children. So really thinking about an infrastructure of what it takes to involve a child and maintain them in the program.
So this was a great laboratory for you to do your work, because in a sense you have like a really known excellent program. So if there's going to be any result, it's going to be here. So tell us about, because there is a wide variety of music educational programs out there, and not all of them are this good. And I think sometimes that's a problem when it comes to evaluating the effect of music education on a child's life, because if the program isn't good, if the teacher is not inspiring, it's not going to be effective. In fact, it could be deleterious. It can develop a fixed mindset and harm, not harm, but anyway. So tell us a little bit about the kinds of measures that then you looked at. And I think we've all seen the evidence for academic achievement, and it's strong. There we can talk about whether or not there are issues with socioeconomic status playing a confounding role, but I really want to hear focus on the social and emotional growth.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So I'll start by saying that I want to give credit to LA Philharmonic and Yola for allowing us to go to the program with the complete understanding that we could go and say we didn't find anything. So there was no agreement that we will find something no matter what you're doing. So they really did put themselves on the line to be assessed and made that available to us, which was really, I'm very grateful for. We wanted to look at cognitive development and not necessarily academic achievement, but like development of executive function skills, planning, inhibition, kind of being able to task switch and pay attention to things that are important, but also social and emotional well-being, because if you get all the good grades at school but you don't have any friends and you can't make any connection, I don't think that really makes you very successful later in life and society. Similar to what we expect from music training, what we saw first was changes in the auditory system. So we do measures behaviorally. We also use neuroimaging. So all these little 6-year-olds that you saw went inside the MRI scanner and stayed still for about 45 minutes, which was its own challenge. But we do that every year. So by now, by the time they're 14 and they come back, they're professional subjects, and they tell me what to do and how this works. In terms of findings, so changes in the auditory system that had translation towards language development and being able to hear speech in noisy environment. So really better auditory skills, having more attention resources to be allocated to what matters in an auditory environment. From there, after 3 years of music training, we began to see changes both in the brain, so neuroplastic changes in the brain, and also in behavior that were not necessarily music-based. So they didn't go to the music program to learn how to have impulse control or inhibition. This was something that was an outcome, that secondary outcome. But one of our findings is that children who were in the music program were better at delaying a reward that is small for a better reward in the future. So they had this ability to plan for future, knowing that if they can wait, they get a better reward, and they don't need to grab something immediately. This delayed gratification, you might have seen, it's assessed typically with the marshmallow experiment, if you've seen in kids, but has a really good prediction about success in life in terms of, do you choose to show up to class so you can graduate at the end of the year?
So let's just, for those of you that don't know the marshmallow test, you might now be craving a marshmallow. Let me just give you a brief idea of what it is. Essentially, you bring a child into a room, you say to them, put a big marshmallow in front of them, and you say, you can eat this marshmallow now, or I'm going to leave the room, and when I come back, you're going to have 2 marshmallows. And there's a lot of controversy about what exactly this test measures. And of course, but when it first came out, there was some evidence that the child that could wait for the 2 marshmallows ended up having all kinds of other outcomes later on in life that correlated with being able to delay gratification. Now, it's a little controversial in the moment.
Yeah, and we didn't do marshmallow because they're old and marshmallow wouldn't work. So we did like monetary reward, whether they would get a 25 cents or $2 later. But the ability to basically have planning for future. And not only in behavioral outcome we saw that, we saw more, we do a similar task inside the MRI scanner that allows us to see activation of different networks of the brain. And what was unique about the music program was engagement of these frontal circuits of the brain that are known for planning and paying attention and executive function that we saw them earlier in children who had music training and stronger. I always have to say that the comparison with the sports group was not as significant. The sports group kids did not do as well as the music kids, but did okay. What we see mostly the difference is between the children who did music training versus no activity, which is really, I think it brings the point that child development is a whole picture. So children do need sports, do need art, so we can't, the point is not that music is better than sports. I think we have to pay attention to all aspects of development. One last thing I say about social development is that their parents evaluated their own children to have more prosocial behavior towards their family and friends, and their teachers at school of children who were in the music program thought they were less aggressive, less hyperactive, and more social towards even other students in their classroom that were not part of the music.
One of the things that we talked about prior to this panel was that there was what you called a milestone acceleration. You would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when you look at longitudinally, it allows you to see how things change. And after 5 years of training and following these children, we saw some of the children in the control group reach the same milestone, being able to do the same level of inhibition and emotion regulation that the music kids could do 3 years before that. I'm hypothesizing and predicting that reaching that milestone in life probably gives you tools and abilities to make better decisions earlier in life that probably have consequences later. So if you know how to regulate your emotion and have better inhibition skills, when you're in middle school, there are opportunities to practice these tasks. And if you already have that ability and skill, that probably puts you forward a little bit more than somebody who does not have. And I think you're gonna follow these children. They're not coming to the lab as regularly, but we talk with them about every year, and to see how this turns out when they are adults and going to college. But I think one of the things that music does is the capacity to reach these milestones earlier in life.
So I want to get back to this idea of setting them up to make better decisions as we talk to Natalie in a minute, but let's just roll the second video so that you can see what happens a year later when Gustavo Dudamel visits.
Have a complete orchestra. And next time, I'm coming back to conduct. Okay? It's amazing. They were the ones that didn't have the instrument, you know? That's this group before.
I mean, I just wanted you to see the smiles on their faces, the pride that they bring to what they've learned. This is after a year. Some of these, students have never seen an instrument like this before, had one. And I think that really helps us understand then the kind of work, Natalie, that you do in terms of, working with kids who don't have music in this way in another part of their life, and you come into the school and, you do your thing. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I have the opportunity to work in a school system that provides music therapy services blanketed for different exceptionalities, regardless of the diagnosis and things of that nature. So we go in and we do group music therapy sessions, typically 1 to 2 times per week. And in that, I'm in the middle and high school settings, so I get to see a lot of the things that Deanna and Assal have already talked about in terms of when we are now at the stage where we've either had that musical experience or not, what happens later in that decision-making process. So in the schools, when we are looking in special education at different things, that inhibition, emotional regulation, things of that nature are a big focus of our objectives when we are making our treatment plans and doing our interventions and activities. In addition to that, with the individuals that I work with in private practice, we're seeing now that there are a lot of mental health needs that are out there in terms of anxiety, depression, trauma and PTSD from several different things over the past few years, and just being able to identify and recognize those things within the students to make those treatment plans and to inform our activities that we do decide to use.
You've talked a little bit with me before about how some of the tools that you use as a music therapist are designed to help some of these students slow down and recognize their emotions, because if their nervous system is in fight or flight and they're just surviving, there's no time to process emotions, and the decisions that get made might not always be in their best interest. Tell us about that.
So within our decision-making process, we are emotional beings, and a lot of our decisions are made based off of our emotions. And so if we have very powerful emotions that are happening at a particular time when we need to make a very important decision, especially a decision that involves risk or being able to make an informed decision to not have any harm to us or others, it becomes important to recognize things like anger, fear, resentment, loneliness, which the Surgeon General spoke about last night. So looking at these types of emotions and being able to regulate, having the emotional intelligence to be able to understand where we are emotionally, what feeling we're having, identifying the feeling, and also the consequences that may come from that feeling in the decision that we're making. And so using the music to be able to bridge that and to help us understand our emotional states and give us the emotional intelligence that we may need to move forward in that decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to emphasize this because I think a lot of the arguments for why we should have music in schools focus on the academics. And look, there's solid evidence and it's great, but I think in terms of how it helps the community, it's not just the kids that benefit. It's the whole community, and for the rest of their lives, you set them up. This is, I think, it's kind of an under-emphasized benefit of these music education programs and music therapy too. Jasmine, you're a senior. You represent the COVID generation in college. 2 of your years were spent, in very different circumstances. Of, the 4, however many years, you had a slightly less traditional route, I guess, because you took a break from college. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a young adult, in this COVID time?
Yeah, so I feel like COVID kind of forced us to sit back and figure out who we were as students, also as people, and the impact that music would have on our future and our lives. And so I was out of school originally when the pandemic first hit, and I realized, I was like, I don't have any music in my life. Like, all of the gigs had dried up. I was like performing out wherever I was. And so I realized that I needed that foundation back in my life, and I was like, I'm gonna go back to school. And once I got there, I realized like how much work everyone had put in to continue that and make sure that everyone still had that. And I think there was a benefit from it. People gained skills, you know, from learning sound trap. You know, we all kind of became like audio engineers during the pandemic. And now like we have a greater appreciation for it outside, you know, of the pandemic. So, yeah.
So I want to see if we can just take a bit of a percussive break, Natalie. It's the end of the day, and we'll come back to some of the conversations. But I can't have all of these talented, you know, music therapists here if you know, and just keep sitting and listening. So Natalie's going to lead us in a bit of an exercise to help us understand too the kinds of interventions that she brings to the schools.
So can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so we just heard from my wonderful panelists about the emotional regulation, the rhythmic piece of things, being able to get our bodies involved in a situation where we can release, and we've heard over the past couple days as well about our brain and the input that it receives. One of the big pieces that I talk about when I work with my adolescents and my young adults is how your music really affects your mood and your well-being, and being very cautious with what you're listening to and how it can affect you. So we sometimes put ourselves in a state that we may not ordinarily be in just by what we're listening to. And it doesn't matter to me what your preference for music is, as long as you're aware emotionally of what you're experiencing and how it's affecting you. So we're gonna do a little bit of a whole body participatory thing. So go with me on this. If you don't mind, you are welcome to stay in your seat, but I promise you, you'll get much more excitement if you stand up. The other piece of this is just relax. If you were with us last night at the concert, Esperanza Spalding said, we are not musicians today, and if you are a musician, you're probably gonna have a little bit harder time, but we're not. So one of the things that we work on with my teens and young adults is focusing on recognizing our emotion and naming it, especially if it's in terms of our decision making and something that we are seeking as a goal. So we talk a lot about recognizing where we would like to be, what our goal is to attain, and how we may be in our own way in some ways with that. And we're doing this within a group setting. So we have people that are willing to share sometimes, and those that are not. So I'm going to ask those that are willing to share. I need maybe about 4 people that are going to be able to share. And we're going to start it like this. In our groups, you're going to be group 1. You guys right here are group 2. Over here, we've got group 3. And then you guys are going to be group 4. You got to be strong and solid because y'all are a little bit smaller over here. Okay, so in this group exercise, we are looking at 4 individuals right now. Some weeks we have people that want to share more than others, and so we get to more. But for this exercise, we're going to have 1 person from each group if that's possible. And I want you to think right now about a decision that you've had to make in the past week. And a decision that was important. It may or may not involve risk, but something that you needed to make that decision on, but you feel may have been impacted by an emotion that you were feeling at that time. So you need to be able to identify the emotion, whether it's anger, fear, frustration, loneliness, whatever it may be, maybe even excitement. Sometimes we get excited and we make a decision. So name your emotion, and then you're going to give me the intended goal or output and outcome of what you want it to happen, okay? Once we do the activity, we typically debrief. We talk about how we are able to recognize the emotion going forward, what you could do differently next time, and the group usually chimes in and gives suggestions as well. So now we've got that community aspect that's happening. We are making relationships and supporting one another. So we're building that bond, rapport, trustworthiness. We're allowing for collaboration. And these are all pillars of trauma-informed care that we have to be able to recognize and put forth in our interventions. So here's a little piece. We're going to do some improvisatory things. So go ahead. Do I have a volunteer from Group 1? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Renée Fleming. My emotion was excitement.
Excitement, okay. And what was the intended outcome of what you wanted? And how, if that impacted your, the excitement impacted that outcome? Okay, so what was the outcome you wanted?
So Howard just got idea to see them all present. So the outcome I wanted was with me. Next president.
All right, so we're going to take that. And so we typically, sometimes we have instruments, sometimes we don't. Today, our bodies are our instruments. So we're going to put Group 1, your instrument is your feet today. You can recognize the socioeconomic status sometimes as well and resources that are available. I try to make sure that our clients have an opportunity to be able to practice these things at home without having a lot of items that they have to purchase. All right, so we're going to do this in our feet. The emotion was excitement, and then the outcome we wanted was win. So that's what we're putting in our feet. We've already built up to a lot of this because our groups meet once a week typically. So they're a little bit more confident in their rhythmic abilities and they can just kind of go with it. But I'm going to get you started. So we are. Gotcha. Okay, so the emotion was fear. The intended outcome was communication. And so we're going to take those two and put those in. So your body part are your legs. So we're going to do fear. If you say it, you can say it. One more time. Good. Now, I'm counting on y'all to remember your part, because I got 4 I got going in my head. Okay. Group 3, who's going to volunteer? Thank you.
My emotion was frustration. My outcome is trying to find the right in-home care for my mother.
All right. So the emotion was frustration, and then the intended outcome was finding care. Okay? So we're going to put this in our chest. And that's a really great one to put in the chest because that's heartfelt and it's something that's really, really close to it. So we're going to do fear, finding care. Frustration. Oh, frustration. Thank you. Frustration, finding care. Frustration, finding care. Frustration, finding care. Great. All right, group 4. You'll have volunteers.
Come on, Kate. So the emotion was anxiety, if you can call it an emotion. And the outcome was liberation from a toxic work situation.
Okay, so we got anxiety, and then let's see. I'm trying to think. We usually shorten things a little bit as we roll along. We get more intricate rhythms, but I'm trying to think. Okay, liberation. How about better working hard? Can we do that? Okay. All right. So we're going to do this one in our hands. This one is anxious. practice that, we go back and we put it all together. And now we're becoming an ensemble. And each person within your group, you're going to be looking to each other, building that community, doing the support, and working together so you can remember those parts, because I don't remember all of them, be honest. So let's try to put it all together. I'm going back to group 1, and I'll come down the line. Here we go.
Thank you, Natalie. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit now about some of the most challenging situations that you've worked with. We've heard about kids who are born already with an opioid withdrawal problem, kids that are born with few resources. You also work with populations of kids or youth who are unhoused. So we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. The pandemic has exacerbated that or brought it to the surface. So I wonder if I could just ask you to sort of share your hopes for what can music do in this moment when these problems are so huge.
Well, I noticed that we had kind of this continuous theme about emotion regulation. And I think when we're really looking at these like very young people, really tiny babies, we're thinking about how our nervous system is responding, and we're getting our regulation through attuned caregivers. So we're learning it from external sources that then move us through aging so that we can more internally regulate. And so I think the beautiful thing about music's contribution is that when we work with caregivers and help them attune musically with their young infant, then that's something that they can carry with in their parenting and other caregiving that hopefully supports them. So we're providing kind of the preventive aspect of emotion regulation, but that it also is a theme that even if they don't get that early on, we know that working with regulation is a really, really important aspect of the way we interact with the world.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so again, that emotional regulation is huge, and emotional intelligence, and a big piece of what I see, especially in my work with homeless youth and young adults, is that delayed gratification piece, and that's a big challenge, because when you are dealing with homelessness, there are so many things you need instantly. You need a shower, you need food, you need to know where you're gonna sleep tonight. And so thinking long-term and future of this is what my career path is gonna be is not necessarily there. So being able to provide the resources and support within a music therapy setting to develop the rapport and say, we're gonna help take care of this for you now, let's think about tomorrow. That's the challenge.
So Jasmine, I want to get back to you and your experience. You decided to go back to school in the midst of this pandemic, and for a lot of young people your age, loneliness seems to have been during the pandemic a real problem, and as we've heard, it has a huge impact on a person's physical well-being.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you navigated that?
Yeah, so I actually, when I first got to Howard, I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. And so I realized, all of my friends back home, I made, in choirs, in groups that I would sing with. So I feel like music provided, a foundation for me, and also almost like a lighthouse to help me navigate to find community. And so once I, found that community, it helped me, throughout my matriculation at Howard. So when we got back, I think that it was a beautiful thing to see the community transcend, Zoom, because it was something that we had already built, but it was something that I believe grew stronger as we went through the pandemic together, and we felt the emotions of each other, and we sympathized with people who had family members that were sick, and we checked in on each other. So I feel like the community of our groups and of our ensembles was something that definitely pushed us forward and helped us continue to move forward,
And you're speaking to, an element that we actually have data to support. There's lots of data showing that music programs bring kids to school. They come to school if they have band practice, and they stay for math. And that's actually a financial argument for public schools to have music programs, because you're going to have more kids in the school that then you can get more funding from the government to run your school. But I also want to just touch on the fact that musicians, and I think this became especially clear, at least to me, during the pandemic, really are emotional role models for many of us. They bear their souls in the musical space, and we look to them for clues as to how we can regulate our own emotions. We go through a breakup. What do? You listen to a bunch of breakup songs. Because you want to know, well, how did that person survive? And, can I feel connected, and so forth. So I wonder if anyone has any comments about this role that musicians play as emotional role models. And, frankly, not all musicians are the most emotionally regulated individuals. There's this paradox, they say, amongst musicians, and, we can talk about why that is. But, does anyone have a comment about that side of it?
I can comment on the interaction of the students in the program that they had with Gustavo as a role model, and it's a very unique it's a very unique relationship, because they admire him, but they also count him as a part of their community. They hug him, they take pictures with him. He really does put resources, and I think that really made a difference. I had multiple kids who told me that they want to become Gustavo when they grow up. And for a 6-year-old to say they want to be a classical conductor, it's probably very rare. So they saw something in him in terms of humanity that they connected with. And I think putting that out there and giving them that pride to play with him, to open the Hollywood Bowl with him, made a difference of what they saw in a musician.
I mean, we all want to be Gustavo when we grow up. I certainly do. Natalie, do you want to comment?
Some other things in terms of intervention-wise, we look a lot with lyric analysis and songwriting with my teens and young adults. And so we may take an example from what they're listening to, but we also have to dissect it and say, okay, well, what worked for this particular artist in this song and what didn't? What were some better decisions? What were some strategies or tools they could have used in this particular instance in this song? And then we also may do a rewrite or things of that nature. So being able to take that and look at the human piece of it and explore that emotional side that they give to us, but reflecting on what may work and what may not and how we can move forward from it.
All right, one last question. This one's for you, Jasmine. You're a music business major. So what are you going to do with your degree? How are you going to change the music business, make it better?
So right now I'm actually interning for Warner Music Group. I'm the sync licensing and clearance intern. So I like to say, well, if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have been like, I don't know, I just want to sing. But at this point, I'm kind of exploring where my skill set works the best, because I have realized that music is a foundation in my life, and I need to take it wherever I go. I do enjoy sharing music with others, so it's a dream of mine to give like music business literacy to inner city youth in my city, because I grew up in like a chamber choir from like a little girl, but I feel like I didn't learn the music business until I got older, and it helped me in a lot of my other classes. I was taking management and organizational behavior, and I was getting by applying musical concepts and things that I had learned in my music business classes. So I felt like if we could give music business literacy to students early on, they could learn about accounting before they get to high school, or they can learn about different jobs within the music industry that could make them money, versus just being a rapper or a singer, So yeah. We'll see.
I mean, the very first, yeah. I was going to say, we use music to learn the alphabet. It's right there at the very beginning.
I learned how to talk from music.
Yeah. Well, Jasmine, Natalie, Assal, Deanna, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences. And that's the end of our panel.